I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I have a pound of ground beef, it's like I have no inspiration and all I can think of is burgers and spaghetti. And then other times I am really inspired and I get tons of good ideas. And in this video, I'm sharing some of those with you. It's becoming a pretty regular thing that before we head to church on Sunday mornings, we are putting something in the slow cooker or the crock pot. It makes things so easy once we get home. So we are going to make cheeseburger soup, which has been a family favorite for so long. We're gonna throw this all into the crock pot, and then when we get home, all we have to do is a couple more steps and lunch is ready. I'm gonna be using my Instant Pot as a crock pot, mainly because it has that saute function, so I can actually cook the ground beef here in the Instant Pot rather than dirtying another dish. It just makes it a little bit easier, but if you don't have an Instant Pot, this is the exact same thing, okay? So we're gonna be using this ground beef from Good Chop. We've really been loving this ground beef and really all of their other products too. We're gonna be using this ground beef. We've got 1 pound here. I'm gonna saute this in the Instant Pot. If you're not using your Instant Pot, you just wanna saute this over on the stovetop. While that ground beef is sauteing, I'm gonna go ahead and cut up my potatoes. I'm using 4 decently large russet potatoes, and I'm gonna cut them smaller than what I normally cut for potatoes whenever we're making some sort of stew or soup. Normally I go with about 1 inch pieces all the way around. These are more like a 1/2 inch. They're gonna be a little smaller, but we're cutting all of these up, and then I'm gonna remove the ground beef from the Instant Pot and add in all of my vegetables. I went ahead and took my ground beef out and just put it in a container. We're gonna put this in the refrigerator. Technically, you can probably leave it in there and just let it cook with the potatoes and the carrots and the celery if you're using that. I'm just taking it out. I don't feel like it needs to stay in there and cook all day or for the next 5 hours. So that's gonna go in the refrigerator, and then when we get home, we toss it into the soup, and then you just mix it all together and it quickly reheats. So we're adding in these potatoes. I'm adding in these carrots. You can grate up carrots, but this is actually something we pretty much always have available in our house, grated carrots ready to go, and I just store them in water so they don't get too dried out. So I'm gonna add about 2 grated carrots here into my Instant Pot as well. Now, obviously you can add onion into this recipe, but if you've been here for a while, you know we're not gonna be adding onion into this. Now, you can also add celery to this recipe if you want to. Another great option is minced garlic. Add about 1 teaspoon or so of minced garlic. It adds fantastic flavor. Your different herb options, you've got oregano, Italian seasoning. Both of those are really great. Sometimes I like to toss in a little bit of chili powder, onion powder, garlic powder, whatever your favorite seasonings are. That's what I would suggest that you toss in. Maybe a 1/2 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of each one, just depending on the flavors that you love. And we're gonna top this off with about 3 cups of bone broth. This is chicken bone broth, but you can absolutely use beef broth, beef stock, chicken stock, whichever you prefer. Just toss that in and mix everything together. So I'm gonna be cooking mine for about 5 hours on high. We wanna make sure that these potatoes get nice and fork tender by the time we're home from church. After church, I'm getting that ground beef out of the refrigerator. We're gonna toss that back into the Instant Pot with everything that's been cooking. I did check the potatoes. They are nice and fork tender. They're perfect right now. So put in that ground beef, and then we mix all of that together so the ground beef can begin to reheat. Another thing that I wanna do, now this is not necessary, but it's something that I like to do because we want ours to be a little bit thicker. You can go about this 2 ways. You can take a potato masher and mash up some of the potatoes that are in the Instant Pot or the crock pot, and that's gonna give you a little bit thicker of a consistency, or you can make a little roux and put that in there, and then that's gonna thicken up the soup as well. And that's the route that I'm going today. So we're taking about 1 tablespoon of butter. I'm gonna let this melt in a saute pan, and then I'm gonna add about 1 tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of flour and let that cook off. Then I pour in just about a 1/2 cup of milk or so. We're just gonna break up that roux that we made and really kind of form this cream sauce. Once you pour that into the crock pot, it's gonna help to thicken up the rest of the soup. So pour that back in. If you're using the Instant Pot, you can turn on your saute function and really get that heated up, and it's gonna thicken up the soup even more. I don't feel like that's 100% necessary, but it all depends on how thick you want your cheeseburger soup to be. I also like to add bacon. If you have cooked bacon, this is a great thing to add in there. You guys know we pretty much always have cooked bacon here available at the house. So I'm just gonna cut up these strips of bacon into little pieces and incorporate that in there as well. I do like to add in some cheese. You can use whatever kind of cheese you want. I have seen cheeseburger soup be made with Velveeta before. That is not our preference, but I know a lot of people go about it that way. We just use a cheddar cheese, and I end up putting in there about 1.5 to 2 cups, just depending on overall what I see, how much soup there is. So we put in that cheese, let it melt, just let it incorporate. When we serve this up, I love to serve this with a little bit of chopped bacon and some fresh parsley. It just looks so pretty. You can use chives or some green onion or something like that if that's your preference, but it just adds that color onto the top of the soup so you have the different dimensions when you're looking at it. Like I said, this has been a family favorite for years. I started making this when my aunt told me about it, probably before I was married. It has been easily over 15 years when I started making a recipe similar to this, and we just adjusted along the way. But it's so good, so easy to make. I love that we can throw all of this stuff into the crock pot and then it's just ready. It's ready at the end of the day, or in our case, it's ready when we get home from church, which is so convenient. If you're a fan of cheeseburgers, if you're a fan of bacon, if you're a fan of soup and potatoes, this is a recipe that you and your family are gonna love. We are going to make chimichurri meatballs. How good does that sound? I love chimichurri. It is absolutely one of my favorite sauces. And I'm actually gonna be making enough meatballs that we're gonna use them in a different recipe as well. So the half of these are gonna be used for this video and half are gonna be used in a different video, because then I have another meatballs recipe that sounds incredible. I have 1 shallot. I'm gonna cut off the ends and then get the outer-ness off, the outer layer. And I usually prefer to take off whatever layers taste like paper. Same with an onion, but you guys know we don't use onion a whole lot here. It's pretty rare. My husband, for some reason, doesn't mind shallot though. So whenever I have an opportunity, I will use shallot. We're gonna cut this into wedges. And you can use your food processor if that's what you want to use to make this. Actually, let me cut this a little smaller. I have my blender cup. We're gonna be using that. Also, this is the perfect night to make this because my parsley is on its last leg here and we need 3/4 of a cup. So we're gonna use quite a bit of this parsley, and I'm not really concerned about breaking it up or anything. I'm going to just snip off the good pieces and go directly into this cup, and I'm gonna get significant amounts of it on the floor while we do that. Okay, I don't know if this is quite 3/4 of a cup, but I think I've cut off the majority of the good looking, saving just a bit in case I need some for another recipe. Now you can throw in some fresh garlic if you want. Just throw in the whole, not the whole bulb, but you know what I mean. Like when you take the clove out, you can throw that in there. We actually don't have any right now. So I'm gonna take what would be about 2 minced garlic cloves and put that in. And unfortunately, I'm out of fresh oregano right now. That's another thing that I feel like I could add to my garden that we would probably use a lot. So we're going to use some dried oregano. I'm gonna, maybe a teaspoon or so. We need about 1.5 teaspoons of salt in here. And then I'm also gonna add some pepper. This is white pepper, but you can use whatever you prefer, about 1/2 teaspoon or so. I mean, if you like it really peppery, then use more. About 3/4 of a cup of oil. This is avocado oil. I normally have on hand. And this is not a new recipe to me, so if you need to measure, please feel free to do that. Because we make this kind of stuff quite a bit, I know exactly the amounts that we need just from looking at how it is in the blender cup. The most underrated kitchen, what would you call this? Addition? I'm not even sure. I love red wine vinegar. It adds the best flavor to things. We're gonna add about a 1/4 cup and about a 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. Now you can go less on this if you don't want the added spice. It's so good though. Trust me, it's so good. Now the key here is pulsing, a pulse. It's not a constant blend. You want to pulse this and just pull it together. Okay, now if you want this to look less combined, so it looks more olive oil-ish, I don't know the best words to use here. You can actually pulse together the shallot, the garlic, the parsley, the oregano, all of that, then put that into a bowl and mix it with your oil. You can do it whatever way you want. That's gonna look more like a traditional chimichurri. I usually just keep it really easy and mix everything in here because then I can just store it in the refrigerator, especially if I'm making it a day ahead. It's totally up to you, but you're gonna get a more traditional looking chimichurri if you pulse it separately, then add in your oil and your vinegar. In this bowl here, I have 1 pound of sweet Italian sausage and 1 pound of ground beef. You can use ground beef and lamb, you can use ground beef and pork, ground beef and Italian sausage, ground beef and whatever kind of sausage you prefer. Just ground beef, you could do turkey, chicken. I mean, the possibilities are endless. I've actually been really loving panko breadcrumbs lately, so that's what we're gonna use. So we need about 3/4 of a cup for this. I'm gonna add about a 1/3 cup of this chimichurri into the panko, and we're gonna mix that together. Ooh, you can smell that shallot and the garlic. Oh my goodness. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mix together these 2 meats because I need to reserve half of it for another meatball recipe. So I'm gonna mix together that pork and the beef. The easiest way to do this is with your hands, y'all. I mean, I could put it in the KitchenAid mixer and do it that way too, but you're gonna get a decent mix with your hands for sure. I choked on a cup of coffee before starting this video. So between that and the shallots, making my eyes water, this is going really well. I'm gonna add in, oh, I almost added 2, but we're cutting this in half. We only need 1 egg. Oh, and you know what? Now that I think about it, I may have mixed too much panko. We'll see how this works. I think it'll be all right because of the type of panko that it is. Okay, we need to mix all of this together, and we might actually need to toss some over the side of the bowl. We might actually need to add a little bit of salt. I have this 1.5 tablespoon scoop that I absolutely love for meatballs. It makes the perfect size meatballs for what we need. I usually will just take a scoop and just kind of like lightly roll it because this rolls one side of it, obviously. Lay them on a parchment lined baking sheet. This works so perfect. And this guarantees that they're pretty much all the same size, so you're gonna get the same cook time on each one. I also want to mention that whenever I make meatballs, something I do a lot is go ahead and double the recipe, because for us, meatballs, they're one of those things that you can cook up a bunch of them and then put them in a freezer safe container, and it can be reheated so easily. So on a night when maybe you don't know what you want to have for dinner, you can throw together a spaghetti and meatball so fast. My kids can actually pull those out of the freezer and easily make up a lunch for themselves. All they have to do is reheat the meatballs that have already been cooked. It's one of those things where I highly suggest, if you're gonna make up a meatball mixture anyway, why not go ahead and just double it so that you have it for later on. Our oven will get preheated to 350 degrees. These will bake for 15 minutes. Then you turn on the broil function and then you broil them for about 5 more minutes, and it's gonna add that crispiness to the top. So good. Let's taste these meatballs, that chimichurri inside of them. I gotta have some more. Those are so packed full of flavor. Wow. Wow. I've never thought to mix chimichurri into a meatball, but that is delicious. You are getting flavor with every single bite. It tastes like you spent all day making them. That is so good. You guys need to make this one for sure. I know I have made this recipe on my channel before, but it's one of those that is worth repeating because it's just so easy. It's perfect if it's chilly outside. Chilly. It's perfect if you're having people over because you can make a ton of it and people will love it, and you can have all the toppings. You can have like a toppings bar if you want to, and it's so easy to make. So I had to throw this one in here for this season. I also almost never make it the same. We change things up here and there. The first thing that we're gonna do is head over to our stovetop and brown up this ground beef. Now this is a 90-10 ground beef. Feel free to use whatever kind of ground beef you want. I am gonna be adding some salt. I like to add onion powder and garlic powder if we have those. And I always add a touch of chili powder, maybe about a teaspoon in the cooking process. We have our ground beef. It is cooked and ready to go. I wanna know, do any of you have one of those crock pots that you can saute in? Because I've been seeing those and I'm thinking, man, that would be so convenient to be able to saute right there in the crock pot. And I know you can do that in the Instant Pot. I kind of forget about that sometimes though. I use these chili beans. Usually I just pick them up at Harris Teeter. These chili beans I do not drain. Also, we mix this up and change the recipe almost every single time we make it of how many cans of different things we put in. But the chili beans, I just put those in there just like that. I don't drain them. So I think tonight I'm gonna use, I don't know, let's start with 2 cans of chili beans and see what that looks like. We are having 2 people over tonight, so there will be an extra 2 people at dinner. So I wanna make sure that we have a good amount, but we don't need a ton of extra either. But at the same time, I never mind having chili as leftovers because that's something that we can eat at lunch for the next couple of days. We are going to be adding a can of black beans, and I personally like to add kidney beans to mine. Just leave out whichever beans you don't like, or make this completely without beans if you're not a fan of that either. Now for the kidney beans and the black beans, I do drain and rinse both of them. Okay, now I'm going to be adding in some tomato sauce. If you prefer, you could use crushed tomatoes. Sometimes I will also add a can of petite diced tomatoes. We'll see. Like I said, I change it up almost every single time. Okay, let's start with 2 cans and then we'll stir it together and see what it looks like. I'll probably end up going with more though. You want a recipe where you just dump everything into a crock pot, this is definitely one to give it a try. Okay, yes, we are gonna add another can of the tomato sauce. Now, I actually was gonna add another can, or I was gonna add a can of the petite diced tomatoes, but it looks like we're out of them. So we're not gonna add that this time, but you should feel free to do that if you have them on hand. And I think this is good consistency. I like what I'm seeing here. This is pretty typical of the consistency that we usually make, but you could add more things if you wanna add. Feel free to use whatever. But we are gonna add some chili powder. I usually add at least a tablespoon, maybe even more. You can use one of those chili seasoning packets too though, if that's something that you prefer. This is one of those where you can just dump everything into the crock pot and it can just cook on low all day long. And then it's just so perfect. I love this too. We've hosted at our house several times over the course of the past few years. We host something called Bring Your Own Pumpkin. And we used to do this with my husband's family, and they would come over and we would do pumpkin carving and you would just have chili cooking and it would be there all night. People could grab it as they wanted to. It was just one of those things that it's so perfect if you're having a bunch of people over. Okay, we are going to add some garlic powder, but this is a new one. For this, I'll probably add about a teaspoon just with the amount that I made. And same thing with onion powder, about a teaspoon. And again, this is a new one. If you guys were here for one of my recent videos, I don't remember which one, but it was like I ran out of all of our spices at the exact same time. So I had to go buy about $30 in spices. That it always seems to happen that way though. And normally I get my spices in the refill packets where you can refill these containers. I get them from Thrive Market. But when I went online to order, it was one of those where I really needed the spices for that night for what I was making. And so I just didn't plan ahead. I didn't plan properly at all. I'd add whatever spices you love into this recipe. I might come back and taste it in a little bit and decide that it needs a little bit of something else, but that's how we do this. So like I said, this is just gonna go into my crock pot, and then we're just gonna cook this on low, and it can sit here all day long. Pretty much everything is cooked in it. It's just a reheat process. And then the longer it simmers together, the better it tastes. This chili just never fails. I love making this one when we're having people over because it is one of those where you don't have to worry about it. You just throw it all in the crock pot and then it's ready to go when you have company over. It also feeds plenty of people. We have made this so many times and it is just so good each and every time. I love to top ours with sour cream and a little bit of cheese. We also love Fritos. Sometimes we'll change it up and do cornbread. Even tortilla chips are great for this. Our verse today comes from Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new here, I would love if you would subscribe and stick around. If you want to get more inspiration and encouragement, check out the video that I have listed above. I hope you're having a great week.